They didn't just cut through my driveway. They erased it like it never existed, and somehow still expected me to thank them for it. The crazy part is, if they had just asked, I probably would have worked something out, but they didn't ask, they decided, and that's when I decided right back. By the time they realized what they'd done, it wasn't about gravel anymore. It was about respect, and that's a much more expensive lesson. So let me back up a little, because none of this started dramatic. It started quiet, the kind of quiet you don't notice until it's gone. I live out on about 12 acres just outside a small farming town. The kind of place where people wave even if they don't know you, where roads don't get names so much as descriptions. Turn past the old red barn, keep going till the fence leans left, that kind of thing. My place sits back off the main road, and the only way in is this long gravel driveway that cuts straight through the land like a worn path someone forgot to erase. That driveway's been there about 40 years, maybe a little more, older than me, older than the house in its current form. It's not pretty, not something you'd show off in a magazine, but it's solid, packed tight from decades of use, with shallow drainage ditches running along both sides that I've maintained myself every spring. When the rains come, the water moves where it's supposed to, doesn't flood, doesn't wash out. And in a place like this, that matters more than curb appeal. I take care of it, that's the thing. Every few months I'll top it off with fresh gravel where it's needed, smooth out the ruts, clear the ditches. It's work, but it's my work, and more importantly, it's my only access in or out. No driveway, no way home, simple as that. For years, nobody touched it, nobody questioned it, nobody even looked twice at it. Then the lot next to mine sold. Now that lot had been empty as long as I could remember, just open land, a little overgrown, nothing special. Then one day, a couple of survey stakes showed up, bright orange flags fluttering like little warnings nobody paid attention to yet. A week later, trucks started rolling in, and suddenly it wasn't empty anymore. It was a construction site. Big project, too. Not some modest house, not a farmhouse that blends into the land. I'm talking a full-on spec mansion. 5,000 square feet, stone facade, massive garage. The kind of place that looks like it belongs behind a gate with a keypad and a camera. Not out here where your nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away and tractors outnumber luxury cars. The company behind it was called Redwood Crest Builders, and from what I could tell, they had money, a tight timeline, and zero interest in slowing down for anything. I first met their site manager about a week into the initial layout. His name was Evan, mid-30s, clean boots that looked like they'd been dirted on purpose, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked up while I was out near the end of my driveway, checking one of the drainage lines after a storm. "Hey there," he said, sticking out his hand like we were about to close a deal. "Name's Evan. I'm overseeing the build next door." I shook his hand, introduced myself, kept it friendly. "Out here, you don't start problems unless you have to." He asked a few standard questions, property lines, how the water runs during heavy rain, whether I'd ever had issues with flooding. Reasonable stuff. Then his eyes drifted over to my driveway. "How old is that?" he asked. "About 40 years, I told him. "Been holding up just fine." He nodded slowly, looking down its length like he was measuring it in his head. "Solid," he said. Just that one word, solid. At the time, it didn't mean anything to me. Just small talk, I figured. We chatted another minute or two, then he headed back toward the site, already pulling his phone out like he had a dozen things more important waiting on the other end. For the next couple weeks, things stayed normal, or at least as normal as they can be when heavy equipment starts showing up next door. Early mornings got louder, dust hung in the air a little longer, but nothing crossed the line. They stayed on their side, I stayed on mine. Simple. Then about 8 weeks in, that's when it changed. I left early that morning, same as always, grabbed coffee on the way into town, went through my day without a second thought about what was happening back home. If anything, I remember thinking how smoothly everything had been going with the construction next door. No issues, no complaints, just background noise. And then I drove back that evening. At first, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn, which doesn't make sense, because there's only one way in, but that's honestly what it felt like. I slowed down near the entrance, staring ahead, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, or more accurately, what I wasn't seeing. Half my driveway was gone. Not damaged, not a few ruts or tire tracks gone. The gravel had been scraped off completely, like someone peeled it back, and underneath it, the packed base I'd spent years maintaining had been dug out, and churned into a mess of mud and deep tire grooves. Heavy equipment tracks cut straight through where the center line used to be, wide, deep, and fresh. And right in the middle of it, like it belonged there, was a concrete truck. I just sat there for a second, engine running, hands still on the wheel, trying to process it. Then I noticed what they were actually doing. The truck wasn't just parked there, it was pouring. A foundation footer, long, thick, and running straight across the path that used to be my access road. I remember getting out slowly, like if I moved too fast it would somehow make it more real. The air smelled like wet cement and diesel, and there were guys moving around like this was just another normal workday, no big deal. I walked up to one of them, a guy in a hard hat holding a clipboard, and I said, probably calmer than I should have been, "Hey, what exactly is going on here?" He glanced at me, then back at the pour, then back at me again. "We're laying the foundation," he said, like that explained everything. I pointed behind him at what used to be my driveway. That was my access road. He frowned a little, genuinely confused. "This? Nah. We were told this was an old farm path, not in use." And right there, I felt something shift. Because that wasn't a mistake anymore, that was a decision. I pulled out my phone, already knowing who I needed to call. And as it rang, I watched concrete fill the exact spot where I used to drive home. He picked up on the third ring, and I could already hear it in his voice, distracted, like I was interrupting something more important. "Yeah," he said, not even bothering with hello. "Evan," I said, keeping my tone steady, even though my chest was already tight. "Your crew is pouring concrete across my driveway." There was a pause, not long, just enough to tell me he was thinking about how to respond, not what actually happened. "Yeah," he said finally, "we needed access for the equipment. Your drive was the cleanest route in." I blinked, just stood there in the middle of what used to be my road, trying to process how casually he said it. "You tore up my property," I said. "Without asking. Without warning. I can't even get to my house right now." Another pause, then a sigh, like I was the inconvenience. "Look, we'll lay gravel back down when we're done. It's not a big deal." That right there, that was the moment everything changed. Because up until then, I was still hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding, something we could sort out like reasonable adults. But that sentence, it told me exactly how he saw it. Not as my property, not as my access, just gravel. "It is a big deal," I said, a little sharper now. "That driveway is my only way in or out. You don't get to decide to use it." He chuckled, actually chuckled. "Man, it's just a dirt road with rocks on it. Relax. We'll fix it." And just like that, I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. You ever have that moment where someone shows you exactly who they are, and suddenly the conversation you thought you were having isn't the one that matters anymore? That was it. Arguing with him wasn't going to fix anything, but documenting what he just did, that would. "All right," I said quietly. "We'll deal with it." He didn't catch the tone, or maybe he didn't care. "Good," he said. "Appreciate it." Then he hung up. I lowered the phone and just stood there for a second, listening to the sound of wet concrete pouring into a space that didn't belong to them. Then I got to work. I started with photos, lots of them. Wide shots showing the entire stretch of the destroyed driveway, close-ups of the tire tracks cutting through the base, the concrete truck parked dead center, the fresh pour crossing my access like a line drawn on purpose. I made sure to capture angles that showed exactly where their property ended and mine began, fence lines, markers, anything that made it undeniable. One of the crew guys watched me for a minute, then walked over. "You documenting this?" he asked, not confrontational, just curious. "Yeah," I said. He nodded slowly, glanced back at the foundation. "Might want to talk to someone about it," he added. "This doesn't look right." "I plan to," I said. And I meant it. That night, I didn't sit on it. I didn't cool off. I didn't wait to see if they'd make it right. I called a civil engineer I'd worked with years back when we were fixing some drainage issues after a bad storm. His name was Mark. Older guy, sharp as a tack, the kind of person who doesn't waste words. He came out the next morning. We walked the length of what was left of the driveway together, and I could tell by the way he was looking at it, this wasn't minor. "They didn't just scrape gravel," he said, crouching down to pick up a handful of soil. He rubbed it between his fingers, then shook his head. "They dug into the base, and see this?" He pointed toward the area near the fresh concrete. "That soil's contaminated now. Cement runoff, heavy compaction, You're not just laying gravel back on top of this. So what does it take to fix it? I asked. He stood up, brushed his hands off. You're basically rebuilding from scratch. Remove this layer, regrade, re-establish drainage, compact a new base, then gravel on top. Done right, not cheap. I let that sink in for a second. Ballpark. He looked at me, then back at the damage. 14 grand. Maybe more if we hit complications. I nodded slowly, not surprised, just confirmed. Write it up, I said. By that afternoon, I had a full report in hand, detailed, professional, and very clear about what had been done, what it affected, and what it would take to restore it properly. Then I made the second call. My attorney's name is Rachel Bennett, and she's not the kind of person you call unless you're serious. She's calm, precise, and she doesn't bluff. I sent her the photos and the engineer's report, and about an hour later, I was sitting across from her desk while she flipped through everything. She didn't say much at first, just read. Then she looked up at me and said, "They crossed your property line, destroyed a critical access point, and interfered with your use of your land." I nodded. She tapped the report lightly. "This is trespass and property damage. Possibly more, depending on how we frame it. What are my options?" I asked. She leaned back slightly, thinking. Fast or thorough? I didn't hesitate. Both. That got a small smile out of her. "All right," she said. "Then we start with an emergency injunction." Within a couple hours, paperwork was filed, detailed, supported by the engineer's findings, and backed with photographic evidence that left very little room for interpretation. The goal was simple: stop them immediately. And it worked faster than I expected. 3 hours later, I got the call. "The judge granted it," Rachel said. "Temporary stop work order. Effective immediately." I looked out toward the direction of the site, even though I couldn't see it from where I was. "So they have to shut down?" "Everything," she said, "until this is resolved." I'll be honest, that was the first moment I felt something close to relief. Not satisfaction, not yet, but relief. Because for the first time since I pulled into that driveway, or what used to be it, I knew this wasn't just me against them anymore. That night, Evan called. And this time, he wasn't distracted. He was furious. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped the second I answered. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, then brought it back. "I protected my property. You shut down my entire site," he said. "Do you have any idea how much this is costing me?" I let that hang for a second, then said, "Do you have any idea what it cost me when you tore up my driveway?" "That was an access issue," he shot back. "We told you we'd fix it." "You didn't tell me anything," I said. "You decided. On land that isn't yours." There was a sharp exhale on the other end. "This is overkill," he said. "You could have just talked to me." I actually laughed at that, couldn't help it. "I did talk to you," I said. "You told me to relax." Silence. Then, quieter but colder, he said, "You're dragging this out for no reason." "No," I replied, just as calm. "I'm making sure it doesn't happen again." He didn't have a response to that. Not one he could say out loud, anyway. After a second, he just hung up. And that was the point where I knew this wasn't going to be quick. Because people like Evan don't like being told no, and they definitely don't like being told they're wrong, especially when there's money and timelines on the line. But at that stage, it wasn't about personalities anymore. It was about accountability. And whether he liked it or not, that process had already started. Once the stop work order hit, everything slowed down, not just for them, but for the whole area. You could feel it, like the air shifted. Trucks that used to roll in before sunrise stopped showing up. The constant hum of engines, the beeping of reversing equipment, gone. In its place, just quiet again, the kind I hadn't realized I missed until it came back. But that quiet wasn't peaceful, it was tense. Because now there was a legal clock ticking, and everyone involved knew it. The lawsuit moved faster than I expected. Rachel didn't waste time. She filed everything clean, tight, and backed with enough documentation that there wasn't much room for them to twist the story. The engineer's report laid out the damage in plain terms, not emotional, not exaggerated, just facts. Soil disruption, base destruction, compromised drainage, loss of access. It read less like an opinion and more like a checklist of everything they'd done wrong. Their side tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. They said it was an accident, that they believed the driveway was an old and used farm path, that there was no intent to damage anything. They even implied that I was overreacting, that this could have been resolved with a simple repair. But intent didn't matter as much as impact. And the impact was hard to argue with. Mark, the engineer, testified about what it would actually take to restore the driveway properly. Not just dumping a few truckloads of gravel on top and calling it a day, but removing contaminated soil, rebuilding the base layer, regrading the entire stretch to restore proper water flow, compacting everything correctly so it would last another few decades instead of a few months. When he mentioned the cost, $14,000 minimum, I saw a couple of their people shift in their seats. That was the first crack. Then Rachel laid out the rest, the loss of use. 2 full weeks where I couldn't access my own property the way I normally could. I had to park near the road, carry tools and supplies in by hand, coordinate deliveries differently. Not impossible, but not what I should have had to deal with. And then came the part they really didn't like, the boundary issue. Because it wasn't just damage, it was where that damage happened. Outside their property line. No easement, no permission, no legal right to be there in the first place. That changed the tone in the room. You could see it on Evan's face. He wasn't leaning back anymore, wasn't relaxed. He was forward now, elbows on the table, whispering to their attorney, jaw tight. The confidence he had on the phone that first day, it wasn't there anymore. The judge didn't drag it out. He asked a few direct questions, clarified the timeline, reviewed the evidence one more time, then made his ruling. Redwood Crest Builders was responsible for full restoration of the driveway. Not a patch job, not a temporary fix, full restoration, as outlined in the engineer's report. They were also ordered to compensate for loss of use during the period my access was compromised. And on top of that, a fine for operating outside their property boundary without proper authorization. Simple, clean, final. But that wasn't the part that really cost them. It was the time. That stop work order stayed in place long enough to throw their entire schedule off. Crews had to be rescheduled, materials delayed, inspections pushed back. In construction, everything stacks. One delay doesn't just pause things, it ripples. A week turned into two into a month. And by the time they were cleared to resume fully, the momentum was gone. Evan didn't last much longer after that. I heard through one of the subcontractors that he was replaced halfway through the project. Reassigned, they called it, which is usually just a nicer way of saying someone higher up wasn't happy with how things played out. The house itself, that big, expensive spec build that was supposed to go up fast, it sat unfinished for months. 9, give or take. Framing exposed to weather longer than planned, schedules slipping, costs stacking quietly in the background. Every now and then, I'd drive past the edge of the site, not to check on it, just because it was there. And I'd see the progress, slow, uneven, like a machine that had lost its rhythm. Meanwhile, my driveway got rebuilt. Not just fixed, rebuilt properly. They brought in crews specifically for it, followed the engineer's plan down to the detail, excavated the damaged sections, hauled out the bad soil, regraded everything so the drainage flowed clean again, then laid down a new base and compacted it in layers before topping it with fresh gravel. I watched parts of it from a distance, not hovering, not interfering, just observing, making sure, quietly, that it was done right this time. And I'll admit, the first time I drove down it after everything was finished, it felt different. Smoother, sure, but more than that, it felt earned. Not because I wanted a new driveway. I didn't. The old one was fine. But because it was mine again. Fully, clearly, without question. A couple weeks later, I ran into one of the crew guys at the local gas station, same guy who'd asked if I was documenting things that first day. He recognized me, gave a small nod. Heard it all got sorted out, he said. Yeah, I replied. It did. He hesitated for a second, then added, for what it's worth, a lot of us thought that call shouldn't have been made. I figured, I said. He gave a half smile. Sometimes people in charge, they forget lines matter. Yeah, I said quietly. Until they don't. We stood there a second longer, then went our separate ways. And that should be the end of it, right? Problem solved, driveway restored, lesson learned. But here's the thing. I still think about that moment on the phone when he said, it's just gravel. Relax. Because to him it was just gravel, just a shortcut, just a decision that made his job easier. And I get that. I really do. When you're managing a big project, everything becomes about efficiency, timelines, getting things done. You start looking at land, at space, at anything around you as a resource, something to use. But there's a line between using what's available and taking what isn't yours. And that line, it's easy to ignore when no one pushes back. I pushed back, not because I wanted to fight, but because if I didn't, what happens next time? Maybe it's not my driveway. Maybe it's someone else's fence or field or something bigger. Out here, boundaries aren't just lines on a map. They're agreements. Respect. Understanding that what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine. And if we need something from each other, we ask. That's how it works, or at least how it's supposed to. So yeah, in the end, they paid for the damage. They fixed what they broke. And the project moved on, eventually. But if you ask me what it really cost them, it wasn't the 14 grand. It wasn't even the delays. It was the assumption that they could take a little piece of someone else's life, call it insignificant, and move on like it didn't matter. Because sometimes, the smallest things are the ones people stand their ground on the hardest. And honestly, I'd make the same call again. Every single time. Now I'm curious what you think. Was I right to go all the way with it? Or should I have just let them fix it and move on? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I've heard both sides, and I'll tell you right now, not everyone agrees on where that line should be.